German Chancellor Friedrich Merz met with President Trump in the Oval Office this week, presented the president with a framed copy of his grandfather's birth certificate. Friedrich Trump emigrated to the United States from Germany. The NATO ally recently backed the U.S. push for a 5% defense spending target known as the Trump bump. More leaders could agree to it at a summit later this month. Let's bring in Kurt Volker, former U.S. ambassador to NATO. Ambassador, what do you think about the idea of getting NATO countries, especially in Europe, to increase their defense spending? How likely is it that they will agree?
I think it's very likely now. I was at NATO this past week. I met with the U.S. ambassador there, members of the international staff, and it seems very clear that the NATO allies are committed to a consensus around 5% of GDP for defense. That seems to go forward at the summit. And frankly, that's necessary. We face a very different environment in Europe now compared to what we faced for most of the last 30 years. You have Russia having launched a massive invasion of Ukraine, largest war in Europe, most casualties since World War II. And European allies have been spending at far lower levels than they were during the Cold War. It's time really that they ramp up, and it looks like there's agreement to do so.
Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, which a lot of people think was launched simply to keep NATO away from his borders, in some respects that may have backfired on him, huh?
Well, first off, I don't believe that that's the true reason. He says that. Putin says, oh, it was because of NATO, and that's why we had to invade. The reality is he chose to invade, and he chose to invade because he wants to rebuild the Russian Empire. He feels aggrieved that the Russian Empire, built by Catherine the Great and Peter the Great, and then handed over to the Soviet Union, fell apart. And so his desire is to rebuild that empire. He uses NATO enlargement as an excuse. There was actually no movement of Ukraine toward NATO since 2008. We're talking, 15 years. There's been 17 years. Nothing has been happening. So that's just a story. Now, that being said, I think that NATO countries, NATO members, which does not include Ukraine, are part of the alliance in order to have collective defense against potential threats, including Russia. Baltic states, Finland, Sweden, Poland, Germany, and all of these countries want to make sure that we have a collective defense arrangement that is strong so that Russia is not tempted to attack. And we frankly have presented a weak position over the last many years. And so increasing defense spending is a way of strengthening that position and deterring possible Russian attacks.
President Trump has said, well, since he became president the second time during the campaign, he said that stopping the Russia-Ukraine war would be one of his highest priorities, and that he thought it would be relatively easy to accomplish. Now he is finding that it's not so easy. Here's what the president had to say.
Sometimes you're better off letting them fight for a while and then pulling them apart. And I gave that analogy to Putin yesterday. I said, President, maybe you're going to have to keep fighting and suffering a lot, because both sides are suffering, before you pull them apart, before they're able to be pulled apart. But it's a pretty known analogy. You have two kids, they fight. Sometimes you let them fight for a little while. You see it in hockey, you see it in sports. The referees let them go for a couple of seconds, let them go for a little while before you pull them apart.
But it doesn't seem like Vladimir Putin really cares that he's losing troops by the thousands, and his military is getting battered.
Yeah, well, let's first take that analogy from President Trump. If you have a bully on the playground and he's beating up some little kid, what do? You stop the bully and you send him to the principal's office. That's the analogy. It's not two equal parties here. Ukraine didn't start this war. Ukraine doesn't want this war. It's Putin that is trying to attack Ukraine, take their people, take their territory, and demand even more. So we've got to get that straight. Now, as far as where we go from here, I think that Putin will still be able to be convinced to have a ceasefire, but it's going to take more financial pressure on his budget to do so. And that's where the sanctions that Lindsey Graham in the Senate and others in the House are proposing are important, because they will actually have an impact on Putin's ability to keep financing his war in Ukraine. And when that kicks in, I think we have a chance at a ceasefire.
So you would agree with what President Zelensky of Ukraine says, increase sanctions against Russia?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think President Zelensky, as President Trump has said in the past, has a tendency in the way he speaks to be inflammatory, but that doesn't mean he's wrong. He's actually defining the issues the right way. He's very emotional because it's his country that's being attacked.
Yeah.
And so it does kind of inflame the emotions on all sides. But ultimately, if we don't want to see a bigger war in Europe, Putin has to be stopped in Ukraine. If we allow him to successfully take Ukrainian territory, rebuild his military, claim success, he will have other ambitions elsewhere in Europe that are all related to taking back pieces of the former Russian Empire.
Yeah, that may have started when he seized Ukraine back in the early 2000s. Ambassador Kurt Volker, it's good to have you on. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.